So far, we have 3 attendees.
One attendee named guest.
So for the person who's identified themselves as a guest on the attendees list, if you can click on the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you can rename yourself. And we were asking that people identify themselves first and last name, so we have it for the record.
Well, if you'd like to get started, Mr. Chairman, you may do so.
Fantastic. Close this for a minute. So at the tender hour of 5:02, I'd like to start the planning board meeting December 2nd, quorum being present. This meeting is recorded by video and audio in accordance with the state open meeting law pursuant to section 20 of chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021. This meeting will be conducted by remote participation. Additionally, all votes taken by the planning board during this meeting, this and future meetings, remote meetings, will be by roll call vote. If there is a public comment period, if you are calling in on a phone, you can press *9 to request to speak. If you are watching on a computer or a device, there is a raise the hand button that you can tab to press to request to speak. And by introduction of planning board members, we have Jane Ramson, Greg Catamatori, our planning director, Hank McCarl, David Rosen, Doug Cook is someplace. He still thinks it's morning, but that's okay. Beverly Bookin has joined us, and Sean Henry is in attendance as well. There's Doug, welcome. So the meeting has been called to order. Introduction of staff. First on the consent agenda is a site plan review application submitted by 58 Great Republic Drive, LLC, to construct a marijuana cultivation and manufacturing establishment to be located at 58 Great Republic Drive, Assessor's Map 263, Lot 18. And any update, Greg, on this one?
Yes, so I'll just stop sharing for a second so you can see me. We had a review meeting with staff, with the applicants and the representatives, and kind of covered some of the issues that were raised by the planning board as well. They are preparing to respond to that, and just sent in a notice this morning asking a request to be continued to the December 16th meeting, where they feel they'll have enough time to respond and certainly get those responses to the board in advance of the meeting.
Fantastic.
So just a motion to continue it to December 16th.
I make a motion to continue the site plan review application for 58 Great Republic Drive to December 16th.
Yep.
Thank you. Motion and a second.
I'll second.
Thank you, Henry. All, I guess roll call vote. Thank you.
Member Noonan,
Yes, please.
Member McCarl,
Yes.
Member Bookin,
Yes.
Thank
Member
you.
Cook,
Yes.
and I think we're still absent, Mr. Henry. Oh, Mr.
No,
Henry,
Yes.
you were off my screen. Member Remsen
Yes.
and Member Rosen.
Yes.
Okay.
Just the agenda back if you don't mind.
Yep.
Okay, so continued public hearings in accordance with the provisions of Mass General Law 48, Section 5, and the Gloucester Zoning Ordinance, Section 1.11, the Gloucester Planning Board will hold a remote public hearing on the relative to the following. That seems awkward. Proposed amendments to the Gloucester Zoning Ordinance by amending Section 2.3.1 residential uses, numbers 1 through 6, Section 3.2 dimensional table for 1, 2, and 3 family dwellings, minimum lot per dwelling unit, square footage, minimum lot width, maximum building height, and footnote A, section 3.2.2, dimensional requirements for multifamily dwellings and their accessory uses other than signs, maximum building height in feet, and footnote F in section 3.1.6B, building heights greater than 35 feet. Whew, that's a lot of verbiage. So I will open the continued public hearing. And Greg, if you want to sort of bring us up to date where we are from last time.
Sure. You recall the public, everything was kind of outlined at the last meeting. You also took public testimony. I believe we had 4 in favor and 8 that spoke in opposition to the proposals in a variety of ways. I think you can categorize, the support was around, positively, thinking it's a good step to create some balance between the allowance of 2-family in most districts. Again, reminding that the previous analysis that was provided in most all of the residential districts other than the RC40, the allowance of 2-family is allowed by right. It's really the discrepancy between when an existing structure that's being converted has an exterior change, which requires a special permit. So there was a lot of feedback, I think, about density, about the character of 1- and 2-family neighborhoods, in objection to this proposal that it would result in an increase in density, and that that should be focused in the downtown area or areas where there's access to amenities. And I think, very clearly in the development of these proposals with our consultant, with the Housing Production Plan Implementation Group that included members of council, zoning board, housing authority, local action groups. It is a question of, to serve the community needs. Do we need to be looking at all of our residential districts and how they can help meet that need that was identified in that planning process? So that, the allowance is there already. So at a couple of meetings back, Gemma had provided some analysis of, what the implication would be in terms of potential. And really the only potential that doesn't exist now is the effect of changing the lot area per dwelling unit, which, as we know, in the larger lot districts requires a doubling of lot size to consider a 2-family unit. And I think that was on the order of a couple of hundred lots that would now be eligible because they were otherwise lot area limited. But again, other than that, each of the lots, if they complied with those districts, could have a new 2-family. So there's no real change in the allowable density other than that's affected by the lot area requirement. And then we moved into a discussion of height, and I think there was the bulk of, well, maybe not the bulk, but I don't think there was anyone that had any objections to the allowance of 2-family that didn't have an objection to an increased allowance of height. A number of things being cited in terms of, again, kind of a game changer, changing the rules of, what's been applied for quite some time and the impact that might have. So, I mean, obviously we have the testimony, we have the record, we will have minutes at some point. We're having a challenging time with preparing minutes without having a minute taker. But, I think we'll obviously hear more. And just to outline for folks that were on the meeting as well, again, a fairly lengthy lead up to this process. There's been questions and concerns around access and being able to voice your opinion. And that's exactly what this is. Until there is a formal proposal, that's where the action happens. But again, these have been discussed as agenda items on the planning board subcommittee, and even outlined in the housing production plan. There's nothing really new in these proposals. It's really, again, the kind of refinement of the 10 or so proposals that were outlined in the housing production plan. And then prior to the initiation of the recent changes to the inclusionary ordinance and the ADU ordinance, each time that I appeared in front of from the city council, along with Judy Barrett at times, we continue to reiterate the types of things that the planning board has been contemplating over the last couple of years at this point. And just one final, there was some, either representation by folks that spoke or maybe in the chat that things have been decided. Clearly not the case. These proposals have been modified over that time period. And I would not be surprised if they are either modified by the board further based on the input that they've received, as well as the council as they receive recommendation on, at this point, 9 types of changes in the dimensional tables and the use allowance, as they consider your recommendation, additional public testimony when they hold their own public hearing next year.
It was also pointed out that there was a potential conflict with some of the arguments presented in the whole concept of affordable housing. That affordable housing and changing the nature of neighborhoods in terms of changing, single family to 2-family and so forth, there is a conflict, and I think that needs to be recognized between the concept of, are we going to provide things that permit more affordable housing, or are we going to concern ourselves about the structures that are already in existence that people feel they're going to ruin the neighborhood because the nature of the structures would change.
Thank you for that, Henry.
And I guess I would just clarify further, not everything that is being done is just to address affordability.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different community needs for different types of housing. In particular, the 2-family, the ADU that's been passed, we have heard, I personally hear it quite a bit, working in this department, working alongside with the building department, of people looking for options on the existing property that they have. And again, it all goes back to, there is the 2-family allowance, and part of what's been, I suppose, also testified at this point as we talk about 2-family, I think is some objections to it, and I don't think that that's invalid. It's certainly, people are welcome to have their opinions about what type of housing they would like in their neighborhoods. 351 communities all deal with this in a different way and get to do that. So that's why I want to make sure that anybody that's suggested that these decisions have been made, there certainly has been made a decision to make a proposal, and that's what's being evaluated by the members of the planning board, the public, and ultimately the city council that will decide.
Thank you for that clarification, Greg. I guess at this point, I think that unless there's board members that have other comments that they want to make that haven't been previously made, I know that we ended our last meeting with a little bit of discussion that was not finished. I think Dave and Rosen and Sean both had a topic to discuss, but unless board members want to have a further discussion about that, I would like to open it up to members of the attendees that haven't spoken on issues that have been already brought up. And I think Greg's got a sort of a short list.
I just want to make one other observation. We also suggested that folks at the last meeting were welcome to provide written comment. We did receive one submission from Linda McCarrison, which was distributed to the board, and she's also present this evening.
Right. Thank you for that. Thank you, Linda. Go ahead, David.
Greg, can you just clarify what the process is for tonight? I know we're having a public hearing on this, and then what? What's the next step after that?
Sure. So I think if the chairman has suggested he's going to take additional public testimony, the usual format is in favor of, or, obviously there's a lot of different proposals and folks might feel differently about different ones. take additional public testimony, conclude that. If the board feels ready to move into deliberation, then it would be discussing, each of the items and how you'd like to present your recommendation to the city council. And again, Jane is the motion maker. I have provided her some draft language, and again, just full transparency. Every motion is always made in the affirmative, and then a vote is taken. So it would be each item to be recommended for the council to take action on in a positive way, and then after discussion on those items by the board, ultimately you'll take a vote on that motion. And if there's a unanimous vote, then it's very clear that something's supported by the full board, and that'll be reflected in a report to the council. And I think it's where there's more discussion or difference that we'll want to spend some time, and that will also be reflective to the council about how strong of a recommendation it is from the board if it's not a unanimous decision. And I will certainly put together a report and also carry that forward in terms of kind of framing how the discussion was, and you're obviously all can follow that process and continue along as well if you're asked for your opinions in the future.
Any follow-up?
And I might just add, meaning, David, that we don't have to carry this forward as an entire package. We can, it is currently divided up into its individual points.
Yeah.
And
Yep. I just wanted that on the record for the meeting. I understood that. Thank you.
Okay.
Great.
Very good. So any further discussion and deliberation by the board members on what's before us this evening? Hearing none, we do have Sunny Robinson who's raised her hand to participate. Again, Sunny, just name and address for the record, please.
Sunny Robinson, 20 Harvard Street. I have a comment and then a question, if I may. First, my comment is, I just would like it to be on the record that myself and some other people who have been following all these proposals coming out of the housing production plan and going to the planning board have found the planning board and the information about all these proposals to be readily available, and the opportunity to participate in them has actually been terrific. So I thank you for all of that. And I'm sorry there are others in the community who think that is not accurate. Now, my question relates to something that Hank was saying, and I have to confess that I missed the last discussion 2 weeks ago and have not yet had a chance to look at the recording from that. So could someone say a little bit more about why there is some perception of a conflict between the attempts to increase housing that is affordable and moving to 2 families? Because I actually don't understand what that conflict might be. A second unit could well be constructed as an affordable unit. So thank you if someone can speak to what that concern, how that concern was perceived.
Appreciate your comment. And Greg,
Do you want me to respond now, or I could quickly?
Yeah,
I'm not sure if it'll be a full response. I think, again, I think that's part of, there has to be a recognition or maybe some misunderstanding that the housing production plan was not just about affordability. It was about housing needs across the community. And that's at all income levels. Affordability was definitely focused upon to understand what that need is. And there's already, as Sunny, you already know the proposals that have been made. I think there was some characterization that, increasing the allowance or relaxing the permitting path for 2-family will result in more of a market-driven approach, units that will probably not be affordable by definition. And frankly, that is the truth. And I don't think anyone's necessarily trying to say that this allowance of 2-family is going to create affordable housing. As someone develops an individual lot, there is no requirement by the city to do so. If somebody elected to do so, they certainly can create a local initiative unit. But I think that's some of what was represented in testimony, that is not going to help the issue. Again, I think some of these proposals are in response to what we've heard in terms of in some instances, not all, where folks want to create a second unit on their property, not necessarily in an ADU kind of format, that eventually, there's value in that unit, and that's something that can be either rented or conveyed. So complicated, I think it was a complicated question, or maybe it was very narrowly presented. And again, there's a multi-pronged strategy to try to address the community needs, and they're not all just around, as Sean always talks about, big A affordable and little a affordable. That some of that in some way is addressed by allowing for some additional supply.
Can I just respond to that for a moment?
Quickly, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, not a problem. That's very helpful. So thank you very much, Greg. And I do think the focus of the housing production plan has been increased housing across the entire income spectrum of Gloucester. So what your response is very helpful. The one question or challenge or thought that I would put to the planning board is whether or not you as a planning board have given any thought to creating a mechanism that would incentivize second units to in fact be affordable. And that would be my comment.
Thank you, Sonny. I think that that deed restriction concept was not discussed, as best that I can recall. There was an attempt a year or two or three ago to create sort of an amnesty program to bring those types of pre-existing apartments that weren't considered compliant or legal, but that wasn't, and that died a slow and painful, just frankly because the banks would not accept a deed restriction on a parcel that they had a mortgage, and that fell apart. But that was not a part of the contemporary discussion on two families or ADUs to deed restrict those units as affordable. That's the short answer.
Thank you.
All right, Sonny, thanks again for your comments. Anybody else in the attendees list that haven't spoken yet to an issue that hasn't been covered before we move on to further deliberation? Seeing none. Next steps at this point, Greg?
Well, I think did you ask for in favor or just comment? I didn't know if there were. Okay.
I mean,
yep.
Want to speak for or against? This is your last chance at the planning board at this particular meeting. Okay, so there we go. Thank you, Valerie.
Is that a hand up or not a hand up?
It was for a second. She was there for a second.
Okay, now can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you very much. I thought maybe there would be other people commenting. I really appreciate hearing that the plan was not just around affordable housing, but in general. I know down on Cape Cod, they're accepting a lot of money from federal streams to provide to homeowners that are willing to add units that would be rented full time, as opposed to investors that create additional units for Airbnbs and income generation. And so I'm not educated on mortgages and deed restrictions, but along with Sonny raising that question, I think it's probably worthwhile what I heard last week was the fear that many more units would be created, but they would be essentially investment vehicles sold as condos at high rates or Airbnbs. And I'm not hearing anything in the proposals that really address, what kind of real estate development would result with these changes. I'm definitely opposed to the 35 feet by right. Certainly out in Lanesville, where there are a lot of tear downs along the shore, and McMansions, literally the concept that all these houses here would have 35 feet by right. I mean, the building envelope would just be a huge increase. And I don't even understand what the purpose of a 35 foot by right would be. So I definitely am opposed to that. And I haven't heard any coherent explanation of how that would help anybody. Then some, what we see is new people coming in with a lot of money wanting big houses, and these tear down McMansions are really changing the nature of the neighborhood, and there's a lot of unhappiness about that. So but in general, what I'm not hearing in all this discussion, and certainly I'm not clear that the neighborhood of Lanesville has had a chance to talk about these in terms of the predicted results of these changes on the housing stock out here and what it would do to our neighborhood. And I think that opportunity should be provided either by the planning board or by the city council to have a ward by ward education and discussion. People, it shouldn't just be a few of us who show up at your meetings as last week and this week. I think there needs to be a much more widespread discussion out across the city. And part of my thought there is that it's those of us who live in these neighborhoods who witness the development that takes place, and we need to have a chance to weigh in on what we would see happening. Like I said about the 35 foot by right, we have a lot of experience in our neighborhoods, and we need to be able to talk about what we anticipate would happen and how we feel about that. So even though these proposals have been on the table, I do not believe there has been anywhere near adequate discussion by the citizens of the community out in the neighborhood where these will have a potentially quite dramatic and negative impact on us. So thank you.
So Valerie, if you don't mind stating your address for the record, since we
Oh,
did do
sorry.
that.
7 Sunset Point Road.
Very good. So let me just offer a little practical feedback to your comment as far as height. So I just recently had built a house. I stayed within the 30-foot height exception, and the unintended consequence based on the way my house was constructed was having a 4x12 pitch roof to stay within that height restriction, because I did not want to pursue a height variance from the city council. So as you know, in New England, they have snow loads that they calculate based on the structure of your house and the size of your roof. And they talk about pounds per square foot of snow. A deeper pitch is more desirable, and a flatter roof is less desirable. So that's a practical application for a different slope in a given roof structure. The other perspective I'd like to offer is an aesthetic one. When you have projects that are like on the back shore at the Ocean View Inn, when people want to build to the height and they want to offer as much space to their potential buyers, they will design a flat roof structure, which for some people may be very pleasing. To other people, it's not as, in keeping with the neighborhood is the popular term. So two simple examples of the difference between 30 and 35 feet and how a roof structure or a ridge line is portrayed in a design and in a practical application as far as snow loading, certainly in New England. To your other point, the planning board is the keeper of the ordinance. We've spent 3 years discussing this topic. We've had subcommittees. We've had a working group that was appointed by the mayor with every contributing board invited to participate in the process. It was long and lengthy. We had a working group within the planning board that spent an enormous amount of time working with our consultant to come up with these recommendations. And it is not required to have a word by word discussion on, on these issues. So I appreciate your comments, but this is the process, and everybody has been invited for the last 3 years to participate. But thank you. I'll recognize Jane first, ladies first.
Valerie, I just want to add to Rick's comment that, a word by word discussion is not in fact required. However, all we're doing here at the planning board is recommending an ordinance to the city council, who will take it up and have their own public hearing. And if at that point you want to have a word discussion, you just need to contact your ward councilor during that, keep an eye on the public process, which will always be announced publicly, and ask your ward councilor for a hearing.
Thank you, Jane. Sean?
I was just going to say, with regard to your question about what the impact is on Lanesville specifically, and Annisquam, looks like most of that area is R20, I believe. So the only change that the two-family by right issue has in that neighborhood is that somebody who has an existing dwelling that wants to convert to two-family with an exterior addition that still has to fall within all the setbacks and requirements could do that by right now, as opposed to going through ZBA process to do the same thing that a neighbor who is building a new home does not have to do. So that's the only change, and it doesn't result in any increased units in that area at all. The units that are able to do that would be able to do that still. They would just have an easier process to do it for the homeowner.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize Patty Page next, who hasn't spoken yet, and then we can, if we have time to follow up, we'll do that. Again, Patty, just a name and address for the record, please.
Patty Page, 3 Tidal Cove Way. I appreciate the long and arduous process that you've all been through. I spend a lot of time at meetings. I don't particularly attend planning board meetings. They're a little dry, and a lot of us have not followed this. I would like to support some kind of better, robust process, better outreach. I do attend a lot of meetings. I think people know that. Some of us here do. And they're business meetings. They are not meetings where the public can really address issues or engage. So for us to spend, multiple years following you to do your work, which is your work, and not have a robust public process beginning, midterm, when you get to a draft position, is really, it really isn't a public process at all. It's public in the sense that we're able to watch you, and that's only been recently. Keep in mind, how many of us are going to be able to go to meetings physically to do this for 3 years? That's a long time to ask people. And I'm just going to try to ask you to be in our positions, that if you're going to take up a zoning issue like this, which is big and long and complicated. I've tried to jump into it, and I'm clearly not there yet. When you kick it off, there should be a public forum, a public process. Give it, I appreciate Greg's, long speeches about these things, but Greg tends to talk in planning terms, which that's his job. It's really hard for me from the public to wrap my head around why these things are being produced, what their results are going to be. And, you know, the height by right, I know it's not on the board right now, or I don't believe it is. But in the central district, in the central downtown business district, it's going to be 45 feet by right. Has anybody talked about that and what those implications are going to be? You know, some might be more reasonable based on a FEMA issue, but you know, then you have 45 by right, and then you have exceptions. So these things are getting big and big and bigger. And I'm sorry to say that the public is not engaged. And I've talked to city councilors, they can't reach down to the planning board. They have to wait till it gets to them. And the closer it gets to public hearing, the worse it is, because we can't make a difference at that juncture. I know that. If it's my issue, I spend the time and I go from the beginning meeting right on through and try to give input. So I just, you know, I hear what you're saying, 3 years of work, 3 years of time, but this is your venue. This is your process. You've now brought it to the public. And rather than sit there and say, this is our work, how do you like it? Oh, you don't like it? You've got to work with us a little bit. I really feel like you've got to work with us and say, maybe the direction we went in isn't what the public understands or what the public wants or is with community values or any of that. I don't think that opening is really there. I don't think.
If I can stop you, I mean, is there something that's on the agenda this evening that you would like to specifically address that's not, you know, we're talking about it, something that's been duly advertised. And if you have a question on the height or the setback or the 2-family or 3-family by right, I mean, that's what we're here to talk about in a public hearing. We're not talking.
Well, I'd like to ask about the process. You've gotten a lot of feedback about these things. And are you taking the feedback and are you actually going to amend these orders? Are you just going to not value the public input and forward them up to city council as is? That's really what I'm asking, because when the public comes in for input, it doesn't seem like there's any avenue by which that's effective, is what I'm saying. So I am asking about the process, and that's the process we're in, the public hearing. We've heard about people questioning the height, the 35-foot by right. You know, we need time to understand these things, not just push it through. And this is the process. The public speaking. Are we able to make a difference? And are you ready to go back to the table with them or not? Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm going to recognize Jane, please.
Patty, first of all, the process with a capital P is prescribed by the state of Massachusetts. So we do our best, but that's the deal. Secondly, I take those comments extremely personally. I listen at every single public hearing. I weigh public testimony. I worry about it for the 2 weeks in between the meetings. It keeps me up at night. I am really insulted that you would suggest, I'm not going to speak for anybody else on this board, but that this is a process that's a done deal, because I wouldn't waste my time as a volunteer if this was a done deal.
Well, I appreciate that, Jane, and I see it as a board process, and I understand, I appreciate knowing that this is prescribed by the state, but the bare minimum is prescribed. It doesn't mean you can't involve other processes. That's all I'm saying. The public really feels a little short about this, that, you know, the public hearing is here now, everybody starts to pay attention, which is when we are invited to pay attention, I think. And the question stands. If there's enough objection to some of these recommendations, will you go back and rewrite them, or are you voting to put them through tonight?
So with all due respect, Patty, we are making a recommendation to the city council. City council has to adopt up or down the recommendation from the planning board. And you know that process, because I know you've been involved plenty in the past. So, you know.
Well, we're asking you to reconsider some of your,
But We're not going
Second
to undo, we're not
recommendations.
going to undo 3 years worth of work, Patty, because you don't think you've been, duly noticed. Okay, with all due.
That's the answer. Thanks, Rick.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
I just also want to jump in just to outline and frame some of this. In substantially the same form, 10 recommendations have been in the housing production plan since 2017-18 timeframe. During that 7 to 8 to 9 month long process, we had 3 public forums. We had probably over 200 people participate physically in meetings, as well as providing feedback. It was presented at the planning board, presented at the city council. But I still will say, absolutely, the planning board members are listening to the testimony, and I don't question that there will be dialogue later this evening that will relate to comments that have been made. So it is not the end of the process. It is the point when we specifically are required to, and it absolutely makes sense, we publicly decide how everything is made and changed. So, again, we have different ways that we do planning exercises, and then it comes to implementation, and the implementation is very prescribed, but that's why we have the lead into it. So, and it's okay for people to change their mind as well. And that can happen at the planning board level as well as the city council level.
So I'd like to
Mr.
recommend
Chairman?
first.
Who?
Go ahead,
Me?
Sean.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
All right, I just wanted to respond to the process question that I think of most folks on the planning board. I've probably attended most of these meetings for the past 3 years, and I can attest that we did have members of the public at each one of those meetings. We had members of the public, at least one of which is on this meeting tonight, that expressed interest in maintaining, getting updates on it. And I made a point of updating that group as we moved along. I served on the original group that produced the housing production plan, and that was a very public process. I don't think the notion that we're here tonight with some secretly crafted agenda for changing the city is at all correct. And importantly, also, I would remind folks that we talk about citizen involvement. The planning board here are all citizens also. We're all residents of the city. We're all homeowners or at least residents in the city. We're not some mysterious evil cabal from outside that's trying to lay waste to the city.
Thank you.
We're also not even allowed to discuss this outside of a public meeting. So every single thing we discuss is in a public forum regarding these ordinances, assuming we're law-abiding citizens, which we all are.
Thank you, Jane. I'd like to recognize Chris McCarthy, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Chris McCarthy, 166 Lake Street in Gloucester. I just want to say I've made it a point to make it to every single meeting and subcommittee meeting, as you probably know, and try to give input, and you guys have received the input, whether it's good or bad. There's been other input at every single meeting, and for someone to say that there's no public input, every time that I've asked for input, I've been able to do it. And I know at some of those meetings, even though they were advertised and out there and people were aware of them, very few people chose to attend them. And that's their own fault. That if they're that interested, they should be interested from the beginning to the end. I think that for someone to come on here tonight and say that you guys are trying to, just push something through without public input is just not correct. And you guys have done an admirable job trying to, bring people in as much as you can, and you can only ask them to join. They've got to do it themselves. And again, I think some people are just commenting and not really knowing, not really following, and just coming in at the 11th hour and just trying to kick this thing down. I don't think that's right. There's been a tremendous amount of work, and I think the work that you're doing is going to help the housing stock. It's going to help it from an affordability standpoint, and it's going to help from a standpoint of keeping families in town. I think it's, and And I've said for the last 20 years, it's unfair that someone like myself can come in and build a 2-family conduit and sell it for 800,000 aside without any oversight. But someone who wants to put a small unit for a family member has to go through the Board of Appeals, thousands of dollars. It's just not fair. And I think that has got to change. And I think for people to not understand that and come in at the 11th hour and say, you guys are trying to make stuff up is just not fair. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Are there anybody else that would like to speak for or against that hasn't spoken yet? Linda, I'd like to recognize you first, and again, state your name and address for the record, please. And please keep your comments to something that we haven't already talked about, please, Linda.
Yes, I will. Linda McCarriston, 16 Quarry Street. And something else has opened up on my screen. Anyway, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You know, I must admit that I have read the Municipal Area Planning Committee document today for the first time, and it has made what you're doing perfectly clear to me, because Gloucester is one of the areas that's targeted for, you know, doubling the population around the railroad. I couldn't understand, and I was insulting to Greg Kadamatori when I first read this, your proposals, because of the reasons that were given for certain things, like why go to 35 feet, because it's so difficult, unique to Gloucester to determine the height of a house, and some of the other reasons, which were clearly not reasons. And that's what drove me crazy. I wondered what really was going on. And today I read a good chunk of MAPC, actually, after I sent a note to Greg. And now I understand. You're just, the state is taking over the town, and it has a big agenda, and it will double the population, and it will bring in a ton of people who don't live here now, and probably take out a bunch of people who do. And what you're doing with this you know, proposal is what the state is telling you to do. And I just want to know whether or not individual municipalities have any choice in this plan, this, you know, municipal area plan, whether we have any choice about whether we're in or out, and once we get in, whether we have any control over our own town. Thank you.
If I could just clarify, Linda, you're talking about reading the housing production plan?
No, I'm talking about the state municipal area planning, is it municipal, MAPC?
Yeah, so that's the regional planning authority that assisted us with the development of the Gloucester housing production plan.
Okay, that makes sense.
But I will say that what's reflected in that is reflective of the community process of identifying what the housing needs are. And every city and town gets to decide what they want to do in terms of addressing their housing needs. There have been some recent changes at the state level, which I think you are aware of. I saw an email that I was copied on, that changes that were made in the last 2 years to the state zoning act, relating to how certain uses can be enacted in the community. And there's one particular area that every community is awaiting to what type of requirement or guidance might be provided on. And that's if you've been identified as an MBTA community. In particular, they would like to see focused density around transit nodes, but they have not provided any parameters or what it means to be compliant or not compliant with any provisions from the state level at this point. But the other recommendations that are identified in the housing production plan were generated from a local public process with people participating, including the city council, the planning board members of the public. So it's not a adopting of a state plan per se.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your participation, Linda. Beverly?
May I add to that? We have one station area area in downtown Gloucester. The proposals on the table today, virtually all but a very small percentage of the area of Gloucester are not going to be affected by planning around the station area. And it's the proposals today that are on the table are for the rest of the community, not the station area. Isn't that correct, Greg? So
That's correct.
we don't know what kind of planning will occur. Obviously, the purpose of station area planning is to increase density where people can walk to transit and can walk to other services. And so it's a very special area. It'll have its own special zoning at such time that we do area planning. It has nothing to do with the other zoning districts in our community. So let's not muddy the waters. We need to talk about what's on the plate today, which is general housing rules for all of our single family zones.
Thank you, Beverly. Anybody else that hasn't spoken yet before I recognize Ms. Nelson? Valerie, if you want to keep your comments brief, we do have plenty of things to discuss the rest of the meeting, so.
Sure. Thank you, Rick. You know, I regret that we seem to deteriorate into this defensiveness, that the process is mandated by the state. You've followed it. You've done it for 3 years. You put all this work, and then somehow the public is to be criticized in the way that you're doing. And I would ask you to listen to what people are trying to say to you. This is not uncommon. It's the bane of everybody's existence. I'm sure, Greg, you know this, is that you spend all this time on a plan, invite people, they never come, and then all of a sudden things are done, and then there's this uproar. It's not functional. It's not useful, but it happens. That's the problem to be overcome. And I hope, you know, in our debates at the Lanesville Community Center, over and over, the theme came up by the candidates. The public is alienated from the process at this point, and major things need to be done. Ward meetings, other changes to the process to bring the public back in. I will say, you know, if you're talking to a member of the public, if you don't understand it, you're saying that I should spend all this time in your meetings, but there's harbor plan, climate plan, open space plan. Who knows what else plan there is? Are you telling me I need to spend like an entire career going to? My final point would be, I believe, and you know, someone like Jack Clark brought it up, is one way to engage the public is a master planning process. I think it's past time to seek out and have a full-throated discussion with thousands of people, as was done in 2000, and get a sense of what people are concerned about, what their vision, and then separate plans can align with that. And you're the planning board that has a lot of influence over whether a master plan is done. And I think given this bubbling, even acknowledged by candidates, concern about the process is not open enough and engaging enough people, that you as the planning board member should, I'd appreciate, start to think about the totality of the issues going on here and the need for a really robust public engagement around a master plan process. So thank you.
At this point, I think we've been berated enough. Frankly, I don't know that we've had one comment that was actually onto the agenda this evening for or against, more about process. So I'm comfortable with our process. And if there's no more further public comment for or against, I'd like to move forward. Seeing none, thank you. Mr. McCarl.
I think it's very unfair. I think that there's been some very unfair accusations made here that we don't listen to the public. I think that's very wrong. I think it's very inaccurate, and I think it's insulting to those of us that have worked for years to try to listen to what people say, try to incorporate what people say. And for you to make those accusations, I think is totally unfair. And I think you should consider the fact that a lot of us have spent a lot more time than you have working on this particular issue. Thank you.
Greg, do you want to guide us on next steps?
So again, several proposals, obviously, that were presented surrounding 1, 2, and 3 family in particular. And then the height issue as well was added on specifically, not only to 1 and 2 family, but also to multifamily in general in certain districts. I did provide a draft of motions to Jane, which kind of breaks things down. And if that's the best framework, for the discussion to kind of see where the board is based on everything that we've discussed to date, as well as the testimony that's been provided, that's probably a reasonable framework to talk about things. If the board is ready to deliberate at this point, if you're not taking additional public testimony, we can also get as far as you like this evening and pick things up at another meeting. But if it's closed for public comment at this point, then it's really for the board's deliberation and how you'd like to approach it.
So I'd like to
I'm ready to close the public hearing and I'm happy to make a motion.
thank you, Jane. Do you have a second?
I move that we close the public hearing.
Yes, thank you.
Second,
Thank you, Beverly.
Okay, roll call. Member Noonan,
Yes.
Member McCarl,
Yes.
Member Bookin,
yes.
Member Cook,
Yes.
Member Henry,
Yes.
Member Remsen,
Yes.
and Member Rosen.
Yes.
I don't even have to look at a list anymore.
You're so good at your job.
I'm also ready to discuss this as a whole, but I think it would be more efficient to discuss it point by point. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 motions, basically 9 different changes in aggregate. So we could take them one at a time. Everyone's in agreement?
With you, but I just need to recognize Beverly, please.
I think I'd like to have a little bit of general discussion before we go into the specifics. And one of the reasons is I'm hearing a lot about process, but I think that we've lost message. I think we've lost some content clarification that might help our participants tonight understand what we're doing a little better. And I'd like to have an opportunity to address 3 or 4 areas first, and then maybe that would help our going into the individual pieces if the board, and I have a feeling other members might have some generic conversation that might be helpful. And so I would like to propose that if the board is open to my comments.
Floor is yours, Beverly.
Okay, so I've been writing notes and I get a sense that for all the conversation we've had, that we've missed some very, very basic points about why we're doing this and why we're doing this the way we are. And if we clarified it, maybe people would understand it better. The first is master planning for a community is a superb process and an important one, very expensive, very complex, and every community should engage in it however many years, every 10 years or whatever, in order to guide the future growth of the community. However, at the same time, we have to do current planning, which is to say we have to maintain our zoning code, because every day people are coming into the planning department with proposals with regard that affect the zoning code, and we have to update the zoning code and continue to do our current planning, even if we would be so lucky to engage in a large master planning effort. So it's not an either or kind of thing. What we're doing here is maintaining the zoning code. It's a current zoning, not a master plan and zoning issue. The second is, I think we haven't clarified the relationship of our regulations for accessory dwelling units that has been adopted by the city council, and the allowance on single family sites to have duplexes. It's sort of an either or. You can have an accessory dwelling unit in a single family house in all of our zoning, in all of our zones, residential zones, essentially by right. By definition, an ADU is a secondary. It is not a comparable unit. It is limited by its size, total size or percentage of size, and of the two units created, the existing single family house and the ADU, at least one has to be owner occupied and the other is a rental unit. By definition, ADUs do address our affordable housing stock in the sense that they're rental units and they're smaller, and as a result, they tend to have lower rents. And so the ADU, which was adopted by the city council, is a very, very good approach to addressing one aspect of our housing demand. On the other hand, if you choose not to go the route of ADU, you by right in all of our zones, the R5, R10, R20, and R40, can build a duplex. And there are three options. One is you can take a unit, a current house, and divide it into two units, which is allowed by right in all of those zones. You can build a fresh duplex, as long as it meets all of the setback and height requirements. You can do it by right. What you can't do by right is take an existing house, create a duplex with an addition. Again, an addition that would be within all of the development standards. And so to allow it by right in two categories and not in the third really is problematic. It's legally problematic. It's problematic from a policy standpoint. And my understanding, the lead guidance is that to require a special permit for the third category when we allow by right the first two categories is the problem what we're trying to solve here. And it really does not change the composition of our neighborhoods in the sense that it will create an onslaught of development that isn't already allowed by the code, because duplexes are allowed by right in all of these zones now. Now, having been a planner in another state, it is not the reason that in many other states and many other places, duplexes are not allowed in single family zones by right. But that's because the city of Gloucester and many other cities in Massachusetts do not have multi-family zones. We have no multi-family zones in our state, in our city. And the only multifamily development that can occur must be done by special permit. And that includes the recent 200 unit addition at, is it Halyard? Halyard. And so in a way, the compensation has been to allow duplexes in single family zones. That is what is on the books today. We are not proposing anything that is terribly radical in that regard. And so I think that there's been an assumption by people who are testifying against this that it is much more than it is. And part of our failing is that we haven't been as clear about what the nature of the changes are and the fact that they're relatively, they're not major changes. They're changes that are appropriate given legal requirements, given policy requirements, given our housing policy, but we're not talking about sweeping changes in our neighborhood as far as I can tell, and maybe others would like to comment on this as well. But I did want to make sure that at least there was some clarity on the nature of the issues. And I defer to other members of our board who may want to disagree and or amplify what I've said. Thank you.
Thank you, Beverly. You always have a way of clarifying complex issues, and we appreciate that. Any follow-up or response from board members? David?
Yeah, I just, I want to make sure that the public hearing this understands that the position that Beverly just spoke to is not necessarily a uniform position on the board, that she was speaking for herself, not necessarily for the board. And I guess one of the questions that I would have about this issue about the kind of discrepancy in the 3 points that were made is whether in fact Gloucester's ever had a legal challenge over this issue. My understanding from discussions that I've had with zoning attorneys is that there's no requirement for there to be uniformity within the zoning code. So again, this is just, you know, something for us to consider. And I'd be curious to know whether in fact there ever has been a legal challenge to this issue. So that's it for now.
Thank you. And I'm hopefully keeping us on track for the business that's been advertised and posted as far as the zoning amendments that we've been tasked to talk about tonight. So I'm not willing to have that discussion, David, this evening. It's something that we can certainly take up in the future, but I'd like to stay on track. And if there's no other further comments among board members, I'll recognize Sean Henry, please. Oh, gotta unmute yourself, buddy.
You guys don't want to listen to my dog barking in the background. I think to David's point, the issue with aligning those our process for those uses is really one of I guess you would term it equality, right? That basically on neighboring lots, I can build a new 2-family house by right. I can convert an existing 2-family house internally by right. But if I'm going to add an addition, even if I meet all the other requirements, for some strange reason, I'm forced to go to the ZBA. That's not equal treatment. And whether we've been sued for it or not, I don't think is the point. I think that the issue that we're sort of addressed with is ensuring that our zoning ordinances are applied fairly and equitably across the board. And I think that actually brings me to the only other significant change with the 2-family by right issue is that we've reduced the square footage requirement, lot size requirement for our larger zones, R80, R40, R30, that previously or currently we require for some reason that they double in size in order to produce a 2-family unit. So if I have a 4-acre lot and I want to do a 2-family, I have to have an 8-acre lot, right? Or if I have a 2-acre lot, I have to have a 4-acre lot. That's inequitable, particularly when the impact of a 2-family on 4 acres is significantly less than a 2-family that we allow by right in the R5, right? A 2-family next door to me in an R5 could potentially have far more significant impact on my quality of life than if I'm out in R40 or R80 and the guy next door or a gal next door builds a 2-family. I'm not even going to notice it, right? Again, just to move from this to the height, which I think is our only other significant change tonight. I think if you look back, we've instituted zoning in I think 1969 here. There are a multitude of houses that exceed that 30-foot unit or the 30-foot height limit that were built prior to that. And since implementation of the 30-foot restriction, which is unique, I think, in Massachusetts to Gloucester and Rockport. I don't think there are many other municipalities within Massachusetts, certainly not our closest neighbors in Beverly, Peabody, Salem, et cetera, that go with a 30-foot versus a 35-foot. So again, I'm not sure what the motivation was 50, 60 years ago to make 30 feet, but we do know that currently that 30-foot limit is one of the biggest issues that comes before, and most frequent issues before the ZBA. Again, requiring the homeowner, not developers, but the homeowner to spend significant amounts of money to be able to build a home that's suitable for the environment, whether, as Rick was talking earlier about snow load, or if you're facing rising tide and you need to elevate, not have any livable area on that first floor, you're going up 30 feet. If we remain at that, it's going to do one of two things. It's going to populate our city with a lot of flat roofs, or it's going to be an inequitable application of the height exception to those people who have the least litigious neighbors. They're going to be able to do it, whereas if you have litigious neighbors, you're likely not. And we've seen evidence already of that. And so I think one of our purposes here is to streamline and smooth things. Again, not so that the city is overrun with developers from outside, but that we make it smoother for the citizens of Gloucester and those who want to be citizens of Gloucester to work through our process. I think that's the ultimate goal. And just, again, not to run on too long, but just to refer back to the housing production plan. Housing production plan was drafted with the previous plan 2000, 2001, that in mind, and was drafted again, not just to create big A affordable housing, but to try to find ways to make housing more affordable for the middle-class people in Gloucester that want to remain here. And I think those changes we're voting on tonight all do that. And one other point, the 45-foot limit. 45-foot limit is limited to those multi-use commercial on the bottom, residential on top, along the Main Street, Roger Street corridor downtown. There's no threat of 40-foot condos on the harbor, because as we all know, harbor is still marine industrial. And I think that is a straw man argument to think that our harbor is going to be ringed with 45-foot condos simply because we're trying to help the folks who own property on Main Street to be able to rehabilitate some of those buildings and get more stuff going on downtown.
I just want to read something which I think is very clear, and that's Section 4 of the State Zoning Act that is called Uniform Districts. Any zoning ordinance or bylaw which divides cities and towns into districts that shall be uniform within the district for each class or kind of structure or use permitted. So I think we are clearly in that discussion that Beverly also outlined. When we talk about two-family, you have a decision to make how you permit it, but you should be uniform in your application of the process for the creation of that use. So I am not aware that there's been challenge, but it certainly does seem like it's a different treatment of the same use in the same district. Mr. Chairman, you're muted.
There we are. David, any rebuttal? Thank you. So now, Jane, I think you're on deck.
1 second, let me turn my on. Okay, so we have 9 potential motions, and maybe before I read each motion, or I'll try to describe it in layman's terms just quickly first. So, and then we can have some discussion after each motion and then pass or not pass each motion. So the first motion is this business about conversion of one family to two family. And currently, the current zoning allows everyone to convert one family to two family, except in R40, or except if you have changes to the exterior dimensions of the building, which is what Sean was referring to earlier. So we're to fix this inequity, we are suggesting that we just simply allow conversion of one family to two family, even if you have changes to the exterior to the building and you don't have to go to ZBA in case you have changes to the exterior of the building. It's that simple. The only other change with that would be in R40, we currently do not allow two family. And in this case, we would propose to step up to a special permit, not allowing it as of right, but proposing that anyone who wants to do a two family in R40 goes to the ZBA. And just for people who aren't familiar with all our zone, I know everyone's throwing out R5, R20, R40, and so on and so forth. Maybe Greg could throw up the zoning map, because as we read the motions, we are talking about specific things in specific districts. So just quickly,
Jane, it's RC 40. That's a special
I'm
permit.
sorry, Sean, you're right, RC 40. So the green, most of the green is R40. That's our larger acre zoning. And then R20 is the orangey yellow. It's more yellow than orange. So that's like Annisquam, Lanesville, I don't know, Wingersheek, all that stuff. So it's mostly bordering the Annisquam River, except for R10, which is sort of Wheeler's Point area. It's a little more dense than R20. And then our only other ones that are very interesting are really R5, which is down around the center of town. And then that red strip, which is Main Street, which is, what is that, CB, I guess. Yeah, and then our C40, which is for some reason Eastern Point, and then parts of Magnolia. So the first motion, so the way this works also for the public is that according to Robert's Rules of Order, or however we're supposed to do it, we make a motion in the affirmative. So someone makes the motion, someone seconds it, and then the board will have discussion, and then the board will vote yes or no. So it doesn't mean that something's been pre-decided. This is simply the legal form of the process. So the first motion, I move to recommend to the city council to amend the zoning ordinance, section 2.3.1, residential uses numbers 2 and 3, to allow conversion of one family and new two family dwellings by right in the R40, R30, R20, R10, and R5 zoning districts, and by special permit issued by the Zoning Board of Appeals in the RC 40 zoning district, and renumbering uses numbers 5A and 5B to number 4 and number 5 as reflected in the draft proposal.
So
And
that's
now
it.
we have discussion.
You need a second.
You have a
I'll second it, but you need a second before we can have
Yes, of course.
discussion.
Second.
Okay. Yeah.
Any discussion?
I just want to say that to round out my comments about how we're approaching the housing production plan. If a homeowner in any of these zones choose to put in an ACU, a accessory dwelling unit, they cannot then create a duplex. A property owner who chooses to put a duplex on their site, on their property, on any of these zones, then cannot add an ADU. It's kind of an either or. So I just want to make sure that, and as I mentioned, the ADU is the more likely to be the affordable housing type, and it's not clear what the duplex would be, but the chances are the duplex would be market value, either rental or sale product. So I just want to be clear that it's an either or kind of proposal with regard to what property owners can do with their land under current zoning. and under this proposal as well.
Any other further discussion, Jane?
I'm in favor of this proposal because I think it's more equitable and it's basically a cleanup of the code.
David?
Is there a reason why we've grouped these two provisions together as opposed to separate votes
Which two?
in this motion, Jane? That the RC 40 requires a special permit, that we could vote on that separately versus voting on the first part of the motion?
No, I think it was just grouped together because it's in the same line in the table, so it's cleaner to vote on it together. But it could be voted on separately.
Okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Greg.
Yeah, I kind of took them by section and by line item, but if there's discussion, to modify the motion, that type of thing, that certainly can happen. If that's a suggestion.
I'd prefer that. I'm in favor of the RC 40 special permit, not in favor of the first part of the motion. So if we could vote on it separately, I'd appreciate that, but that's at the
You're
board's
not
discretion.
in favor of, just to clarify, you're not in favor of changing conversion from one family to two family with changes to exterior dimensions from special permit to as of right?
Correct.
You prefer everyone who has to have an addition to go to the ZBA. I'm not being sarcastic. I'm just trying to clarify.
Yep. I
rather
am not
than-
in favor of there being no review process at all for conversion into 2 units on existing.
Currently it's already allowed to convert to 2 units as long as you don't make changes to the exterior or if you tear the building down. So if we don't
Correct.
change this, it will encourage people to tear the building down, and that's what's happening.
I understand that. And, my belief, as I've stated before in these meetings, is that this is going to encourage the development of market rate condominium housing. It's not going to address affordable housing. I believe it's going to encourage the creation of market rate condominium development.
So
Okay.
That's my position on the board. That's, I don't have.
as a board member, you have the opportunity to make an amendment to the motion. So if you would like to propose an amendment, we can consider that amendment. We'll vote on that amendment and then we'll move forward.
My proposal would be to split this motion in 2 to vote on the conversion separately from the special permit issue on RC 40.
I'll second it.
We have an amendment to the motion. We have a second. So further discussion for clarification purposes, David.
No further discussion on my part.
I mean, I'm asking for clarification on exactly your position on the motion that was originally made that you would like to propose.
I would like to see.
I'll jump
go
in
ahead, Greg.
before you guys get into a lot of parliamentary procedure. So David, if I understand you, and it's a little bit challenging just because what's been drafted has changed the line items, but I think your position is that you would make an amendment to the existing table as it stands by leaving the special permit allowance for conversion, by leaving new 2-family by right. But in the case of where it says no for new 2-family, you're suggesting you might allow a special permit in the RC 40.
Correct.
So it is currently a no, and you would suggest that it would be allowed by special permit.
Correct.
Okay.
But does that now put us outside of the scope of what's been advertised, Greg?
Well, I think it's just difficult because of the construct. I mean, I think the one thing that we could do is
We can do it.
we could pull out a separate motion for the special permit allowance in RC 40 and then
Yeah.
have a motion that otherwise deals with the table as it stands and try to rectify that.
I can pull that
Or,
together in my head.
or alternatively, I mean, you could hold the vote, and if I'm a dissenting vote on it, I'm a dissenting vote on it.
That's the
You could go
alternative.
we're
forward-
just-
You could go forward with the motion. I understand that.
So we have an amendment to the original motion. We have a second on the amendment. So I'd like to call the vote.
Okay, on the amendment, Member Noonan,
No.
Member McCarl,
No,
Member Bookin,
No,
Member Cook,
No.
Member Rosen,
yes.
Yes.
Member Remsen,
No,
and Member Henry. Sorry, I went out of order there. Member Henry.
Sean Henry.
I'm gonna say yes, just because it doesn't, how we vote on it doesn't matter to me as long as we start voting.
plus you also seconded the amendment, so you
Yes.
really have to under oral
Okay,
Robert's rules.
so
of-
that's 5-2. The motion fails, so we're back to the main motion.
Any further discussion on the main motion?
Call the question, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I'll ask for a roll call vote, please.
Member Noonan,
Yes.
Member McCarl,
Yes,
Member Bookin,
Yes,
Member Cook,
Yes.
Member Henry,
Yes.
Member Remsen,
yes,
Member Rosen.
No.
Motion, please.
the rate we're going, we'll be here at midnight.
No, we're not. Jane's coming
okay. The next motion is about conversion to or new multifamily apartment dwelling to 3-family. So that is changing the requirement from anyone in R30 having to go to, it currently exists as of right, but normally somebody would go to city council, and in this case, it would change it to going to the ZBA. And in R5, it's currently allowed by going to the ZBA, and it would change it to as of right. So that motion is, I move to recommend to the city council to amend the zoning ordinance 2.3.1 residential uses, use number 6, conversion to or new multifamily or apartment dwelling, 3 dwelling units, by allowing such use in the R30 zoning district by special permit issued by the Zoning Board of Appeals and by right in the R5 zoning district as reflected in the draft proposal.
You have a motion and a second, please.
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. McCarl. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we'll call for a roll call vote, please.
Member Noonan,
Yes.
Member McCarl,
Yes,
Member Bookin,
yes,
Member Henry, sorry, Member Cook. Member Cook, sorry,
Yes.
Thank you.
Member Henry,
Yes.
Member Remsen,
Yes,
and Member Rosen.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion
okay, the next 2 motions deal with the minimum lot area and side lot width, actually, in the R80, R40, RC40, R30, R20, and a little bit in R10. And as Sean referred to earlier, normally, or in the current ordinance, you would have to have a double of a lot size in order to get a 2-family, and this would just clean this up and have it not be any larger than your normal lot in the district. So, or actually, yes, that's right.
That's close.
So I move to recommend to the city council to amend the zoning ordinance, section 3.2.1 dimensional requirements for single, 2-family, and 3-family dwellings by amending the minimum lot area per dwelling unit by zoning district as follows. R80, 40,000 square feet, R40, 20,000 square feet, RC40, 20,000 square feet, R30, 15,000 square feet as reflected in the draft proposal.
Second.
Second, and motion and a second by Sean Henry. Any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, roll call vote, please.
Member Noonan,
Yes.
member McCarl,
Yes.
member Bookin,
Yes.
member Cook,
Yes.
member Henry,
Yes.
member Remsen,
Yes.
member Rosen.
Yes.
Okay, the next motion along those same lines. I move to recommend to the city council to amend the zoning ordinance section 3.2.1 dimensional requirements for single, two-family, and three-family dwellings by amending the minimum lot width by zoning district as follows. R80, 100 square feet, R40, 100 square feet, RC40, 100 square feet, R30, 80 square feet, R20, 80 square feet, and R10, 65 square feet as reflected in the draft proposal. But is it
Just for
really-
clarification, that should
not
just be
square
feet,
feet,
not
it's
square
just
feet, just feet.
Sorry,
Not
the
square.
motion said square feet. Just feet.
Just feet.
So we have a
Oh,
motion,
the motion said feet and I reread it wrong. Sorry.
motion with the clarification.
Do
Second,
we need a second? I'll
Yes,
take a
please.
second.
Beverly, thank you. Roll call vote, please, or further discussion on the motion. Seeing none.
For clarity purpose, Greg, would you describe why we're doing this?
Right, so this is where, and again, some of these have been around for quite some time. This, results in oftentimes a very challenging for some property owners to simply divide, even if they have the required lot area and can otherwise comply with the dimensional requirements. So there's a disparity between the frontage requirement and the lot width requirement, such that the lot always has to open wider unless someone provides greater amount of frontage than the lot width. So this would bring those two dimensional requirements so that someone could create potentially a rectangular lot. Given the layouts of the lots that we have in Gloucester, it's very rare to find one like that, but it certainly is a limitation for the division, particularly in areas where someone might have a large piece of property, but doesn't have as much frontage. So it is making the frontage requirement not have to open up the lot to a larger lot width requirement.
Beverly?
And the point to our people who are listening in is if you're going to give the right to do a two-family or a three-family as it stands in these lots, you can't then have restrictions that make it impossible to do that. Can't give with one hand and take it away with the other. This is just an attempt that if you approve, as we have the, as we have the density, we really have to then have development standards that allow us to do it. And that's what this is about. It's just fixing that.
Thank you, Beverly. So I believe we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, a roll call vote, please. Greg?
Greg, you're muted.
Yeah, because I'm muted. Member Noonan,
Please.
member McCarl,
Yes.
member Bookin,
Yes.
member Cook,
Yes.
member Henry,
Yes.
member Remsen,
Yes.
member Rosen.
No.
Okay, the next motion is about the height restriction, and it proposes changing the maximum building height from 30 to 35 feet in most districts. And I happen to not agree with a part of this motion, so I'm going to read the motion but not propose the motion. Someone else can say so moved. And then I actually want to propose an amendment to the motion. So the motion would be to recommend to the city council to amend the zoning ordinance, section 3.2.1, dimensional requirements for single, two-family, and three-family dwellings by amending the maximum building height to 35 feet in the following zoning districts: R80, R40, RC40, R30, R20, R10, R5, CCD, which, help me out, Greg, is commercial,
Business commercial.
business commercial.
Civic Central District.
Civic Center District, CB, which is commercial business, and VB, which is village business, as reflected in the draft proposal.
I'll make that motion.
I'll
Thank you.
second.
Thank you, Beverly. Discussion.
Greg, yes, Greg, could you throw up the zoning map again?
Technology never ceases to amaze.
So I am generally in favor of an increase from a height from 30 to 35 feet. Especially as Beverly says, you give us with one hand and, you want it. So if you really are going to allow two-family as it is allowed in the districts, it's much easier to put a two-family into a building with a 35-foot height. That being said, I think it's really difficult in the R20 and R10 districts, which are basically all of our residential waterfront. I guess it's probably obvious why that is, but I think, most of the buildings, all of the buildings along the waterfront are currently 30 feet. And even though you don't own the view above them, I think it would be terribly difficult and terribly contentious to start opening that up to 35 feet. And with regard to Rick's point earlier that about the pitch of his roof, it would be nice to have a more steeply pitched roof, and certainly 35 feet would allow you to do that and so forth. But this proposal doesn't contemplate requiring any higher roof to be pitched. So really what a developer could do is just make a box. Right now they can make a box in 30 feet. And if it goes to 35 feet, they can make a box. So I would propose to amend the motion on the table to remove R20 and R10 from the proposed height increase.
So we have an amendment. Do we have a second to the amendment?
I'll second that.
Thank you, David. Discussion on the amendment.
I'd like to say that I know this is extremely contentious, and I'm not even sure what the vote would be. We've talked about this on several occasions. I think that what Jane is trying to do is find a middle ground that has some merit for conversation. The problem is that one of the advantages of 35 feet in a code where the definition of height is pretty inflexible, that we are contending with sea rise. And in fact, the very place where the 35 may work the best, or maybe the most effective, would be along our waterfronts. On the other hand, she has produced a proposal, a compromise that we should discuss as a committee before we vote on it.
Any other comment, Beverly, before we take another?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I just concur with Beverly that I think one of the issues that those areas in particular are facing is sea level rise and dealing with that. And we've had instances already where folks in an attempt to account for the potential additional flooding have gone through the special permit process, received their special permit to go above 30 feet and have been essentially sued out of the ability to go forward with the project. That the problem with the situation now is that even in instances where people go through the process, it's not contingent upon whether you meet the ZBA criteria to go over 30 feet. It's almost entirely contingent on how litigious your neighbors want to be. And I think that's unfair, because that puts people, again, people who live here, people who are residents in an inequitable situation where if you're in a neighborhood where your neighbors are all kumbaya and they're happy with your home, you don't have problems. Or if you have alternatively the resources to combat those lawsuits after you've gone through the expensive process of obtaining that ZBA special permit, then you get to do it. But if you are in the unhappy circumstance of having litigious neighbors and not being in a situation that you're able to defend yourself against those suits, or you don't have the time to actually wade through that legal process, then it doesn't matter that you've addressed all the needs that you were required to address with the ZBA. And I think that the process is fair if we make it equitable for everybody. And we just say, well, we know this is happening and you can do it. We give you this little extra leeway. And I think also going back to the point that our zoning regulations were adopted in 1969. A big percentage of our homes, still existing homes, were built before that and exceed the 30-foot limit that we have right now. Right? You drive up Beacon Street, drive up Centennial Avenue, go out to Magnolia. Throughout the city, 30 feet isn't necessarily a standard. I think when we were working on our Main Street project a number of years back, average height on Main Street is 45 feet right now. So I think acknowledging the built environment that many homes, existing homes, are over 30 feet, acknowledging that one of the most popular applications for a special permit from the ZBA is to get that little bit of height allowance so you can build what you need, and understanding that we are facing rising tides and increased flooding, and there's a universal need in those neighborhoods to avoid that. I think it creates a much more equitable situation if we say it's just 35 feet. We give that to everybody, and we don't force people to rely on a situation where they go before the ZBA, obtain their legitimate special permit to build their house, and suffer the consequences of a overly litigious neighbor.
Thank you, Sean. Any other comment on the amendment?
Yeah, I just one quick thing. I think my counterpoint to that is that all of this is, well, first of all, we've listened to public testimony, and it seems to be the one really hot button that the public that has made the effort to show up, it's the one thing that they seem to really care about. And secondly, most of what Sean is talking about in terms of sea level rise and everything at this point is being mandated by FEMA. So not that you get an extra 5 feet out of having to build your house on stilts or whatever. No, you clearly don't. But maybe FEMA will start to recognize that that's a problem. I just don't think that those districts are ready for this, are ready for a height increase of 5 feet. Thank you.
David?
I would just say that, the impulse that is driven by the market is to build bigger, not to build smaller, not to build modestly scaled houses. Everything, we're not seeing anything small being built. If houses are bought and torn down, we're seeing much larger houses to replacing them. And I think that this, by increasing the height, is just encouraging greater size and not doing anything to control that.
A quick point of order, if this amendment fails, can I make another amendment? Just because I don't want the rest of it to fail, because I wouldn't be able to, if this amendment fails, I wouldn't be able to vote for the main motion.
I'm not going to
I mean,
defer.
could-
Member on-
I want to say you get 2 cracks.
Okay, or someone else can vote to split it apart so that at least the part we're in agreement and we can.
Can I weigh in? I think that we can take a second amendment if people who made the first amendment for the 35 feet in all of the districts and seconded, and the seconder agree to the second amendment. I think under oral rules, you can do it that way. I'm not an expert, but my recollection is that you
Okay.
really need the original
Mover
two
and
people
seconder.
who voted to. And so I think and if that is possible, I think our committee really is struggling with this issue. And the more kind of alternatives we can look at, maybe we can figure out a way how to cut the baby here. Maybe not, but it would be nice. I'm sorry, that is very Solomonic. But it would be helpful that to have another crack at it. And I appreciate Jane's effort to try and find a compromise. At least we have a chance for our 7 people to look at it. And if it's defeated, then we can always go back to the full original.
And
So I
actually,
think it would.
right, my motion is to take those 2 districts out of the current motion. But then if we do that, then somebody else could make a motion for those 2 districts only. That might be a cleaner way to do it. So if everybody would vote to take these 2 districts out of the current motion on the table, which is to say raise it to 35 feet, then somebody else can make a motion to raise the height restriction in just those 2 districts, and we can vote on that separately.
It sounds to me like it's the same amendment. It's just broken into 2 pieces that make it
Yes, as
an
long as
easier
someone makes
way
another
for us.
motion.
And so again, it seems to me that if you retract your current amendment and the seconder agrees to retract it, then you can make the new amendment. with the
Right, no, I
seconder.
don't think we need to do that. If we just move forward, if everybody would agree that we can discuss these 2 districts separately, that's the motion on the table right now.
Correct. And if you don't mind, I'd like to weigh in on the amendment to the motion. So having gone through a new housing project within the last 2 years, again, you're well familiar with the fact that I stayed within the height. There are practical reasons for, snow load that I've mentioned before, which is additional cost to build to a higher standard per square foot. It's less desirable. I don't have an attic, right? Not that I'm guaranteed an attic when you build a house. Most people have attics to store stuff. I don't. And there's a basic principle that you do not own a view unless you have a deed restriction, on a parcel when you buy it, that your neighbor has a deeded view restriction. And that's just a basic principle, right? You don't own it. So that discussion to me is mute. And the further point of it is that, I was dragged into an appeal of the building inspector's decision that my house complied with the zoning and the building and the pre-existing height. I spent $4,000 defending myself in that. And so the thing is that I forget who was making the litigious neighbor comment, is that I did everything right. This is a personal experience, and I was still dragged in, in front of the ZBA to say, hey, what did you do, right? And this neighbor had every opportunity during the permitting process to say, I don't agree with it. It's on the plan. It looks wrong. Didn't understand the pre-existing height calculation. And the guy's an attorney that deals in land use. right? And so the thing is that the predictability of even a 30-foot height exception without city council approval drags people into a costly process. And I've lived through it, right? With a neighbor who's still a neighbor, right? And so the fact is that you don't own the view. It's arbitrary, in my opinion, that 30 feet is the number, right? And if you want to buy a house in the front row, buy a house in the front row. If you don't want to buy a house in the front row, don't, right? But that doesn't give you any right, more right or less right to whatever you think you have your parcel, right? So I'm not going to vote for this amendment of this motion. In favor, that is. Beverly? No, you're just waving. Okay. Any other further discussion? Hearing none. So I'll call a roll call vote for the amendment to the original motion.
Read
And
the
the-
amendment just so we make sure.
Yeah,
we
to
know.
clarify, the amendment is to remove R10 and R20 from the original motion. So the original motion would only read raised to 35 feet for the other districts, not those two districts. But we could vote on those two districts separately immediately after this motion if it passes.
So this
Okay,
is,
everybody understands the amendments. On the amendment, Member Noonan,
no.
Member McCarl,
No,
Member Bookin,
No,
Member Cook,
No.
Member Henry,
No.
Member Remsen,
Yes.
Member Rosen.
Yes.
Okay, 5-2, the motion fails to amend the main motion. So we're back to the main motion that was made by Sean Henry, seconded by Beverly Book. Any further discussion on the main motion, or anybody want to take a crack at a second amendment to the main motion?
Hearing none. Roll call vote, please.
So does
Member
everyone-
Noonan,
you're voting for the 35 height restriction in this case.
yes.
in all zones, right?
A yes means yes. Okay.
Member Noonan,
Yes.
Member McCarl,
yes,
Member Bookin,
Yes,
Member Cook,
Yes.
Member Henry,
Yes.
Member Remsen,
No.
and Member Rosen.
No.
Okay, the next motion is just a grammar cleanup. I'm not even going to explain it. I move to recommend to the city council to amend the zoning ordinance section 3.2.1 dimensional requirements for 1, 2 family and 3 family dwellings by amending footnote A to read, this requirement pertains to 1, 2, and 3 family dwellings. For multi-family dwellings of 4 or more units, see section 3.2.2 as reflected in the draft proposal.
Have a motion?
I moved it.
second. You moved it, I second.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the grammatical cleanup? Hearing none. Roll call vote, please.
Member Noonan, Member McCarl,
yes,
Member Bookin,
Yes,
Member Cook,
Yes.
Member Henry,
Yes.
Member Remsen,
Yes.
and Member Rosen.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, the next motion proposes to raise the height restriction from 30 to 35 feet in multifamily districts. So basically to make it consistent with the motion that you previously voted on, except that it also would amend the maximum building height to 45 feet. And again, Greg, if you could throw up the map in CCD, CB, and VB. So those are basically the center of town, right? The bright yellow is CCD. VB is bright pink, not to be confused with red. Bright pink is it's over by the river. It's, yeah, right. I think it's that what looks like purple. Yeah. And what else did we say? CB,
CB.
which is, red, which is downtown, right? Okay, so I move to recommend to the city council to amend the zoning ordinance section 3.2.2 dimensional requirements for multifamily dwellings and their accessory uses other than signs by amending the maximum building height to 35 feet in the following zoning districts: R30, R20, R10, R5, and amending the maximum building height to 45 feet in the following zoning districts: CCB, CB, and VB as reflected in the draft proposal, except that I didn't actually mean to move the motion. I meant to read the motion.
So we can accept the motion as read.
I'll make that motion.
Sean? We have a second?
Second.
Mike, thank you.
Point of clarification, we have no multifamily zones. Do you mean multifamily development in single-family zones? Is that what
So
you mean?
I think it's for the multifamily
districts
overlay.
Yeah, it's the dimensional requirements for multifamily. So it's there's a use allowance for multifamily in one table, and then there's the dimensional requirements related to that use. And so it's the height specifically in the districts that allow multifamily, which is R30, 10, 5, and the 3 others in the downtown area, including the village business.
So technically, it's the development stands for multifamily uses, not multifamily zones. R30 isn't a multifamily
Yes,
zone.
correct.
So I
Correct.
have a problem with the wording only because it suggests we have multifamily zones and we don't.
It doesn't say zone, and if I read that, I
Okay.
apologize. It says to
Okay.
recommend to the city council to amend the zoning ordinance, blah, 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 requirements for multifamily dwellings and their accessory uses by amending the maximum building height.
Exactly. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Yeah. And I have the same objection in R20 for R20 and R10, but no discussion needed.
Second. Discussion, Jane. Just to reiterate.
Sorry, Rick. I have the same objections to raising the height restriction in R20 and R10 as I did in the previous motion, but I don't need to discuss it.
Okay. So are you making that as an amendment or just an objection?
Just an objection. I'm letting you know that I'm going to vote against it because I don't agree with it in those 2 districts, but I don't need to drag us all through a second amendment.
Okay. Further discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Roll call vote, please.
Member Noonan, Member McCarl,
Yes.
Member Bookin,
Yes.
Member Cook,
Yes.
Member Henry,
Yes.
Member Remsen,
No.
Member Rosen.
No.
Okay, the next amendment flows from the motions that we have already passed because there's a footnote that refers to greater than 30 feet, but we need to change it to say 30 or 35 or 40 because that's what you just passed. So I move to recommend to the city council to amend the zoning ordinance 3.2.2 dimensional requirements for multifamily dwellings and their accessory uses other than signs by amending footnote F to read, quote, increase by 1/2 foot for each foot by which building height exceeds 35 feet or 45 feet respectively, as reflected in the drafted proposal.
I'll make that motion.
We have a motion so Jane, you're not making the motion?
Sorry, I'm not making a motion. I did say it, but I didn't mean it.
I understood that.
We hit the, here, hang on a second. We have a motion by Sean Henry as read by Jane Ramsden. We have
We need a second. I'll go ahead and second it.
thank you, Beverly, for that very confusing second.
I'm sorry, who made the motion?
Sean
Me.
Henry.
Sean,
John, okay. And Beverly second.
And discussion.
I can't tell what I'm doing here because I am in favor of most districts having 35 feet. So if that gets passed, then this obviously needs to get passed. So, but I still want to go on record as objecting to R20 and R10. Just gonna beat that dead horse. I think it's fine for us to vote for it, David, because well, maybe it isn't because you don't agree with any.
I'm having a hard time
30.
understanding it.
Well,
So this essentially is increased setback for height in excess.
for anything that's 35 feet. So yeah,
Yes, yes.
so I'm in favor of that.
I am in favor of that.
So we have a motion and a second, and we'll have a roll call vote.
Member Noonan,
Please.
member McCarl,
Yes.
member Bookin,
Yes,
member Cook,
Yes.
member Henry,
Yes, sir.
member Remsen,
Yes.
and member Rosen.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, the last motion, again, just flows from the other ones because you'd have to retitle your section to say, instead of saying building heights in excess of 30 feet, you'd have to retitle it to say building excess of 35 feet. So here we go. I'm happy with this one. So I move to recommend the city council to amend the zoning ordinance section 3.1.6 special permit for building heights in excess of section 3.2 limits by amending section 3.1.6B by retitling the section and amending the first sentence to read, quote, B, building heights in excess of 35 feet or greater. Building heights in excess of the height requirements of 35 or 45 feet respectively may be authorized by special permit issued by city council, unquote, as reflected in the drafted proposal.
Motion, Jane?
I moved it.
Thank you. We have a motion. I need a second, please.
Second.
Thank you, Hank. Discussion on the motion.
Can I amend it?
If you like. All night.
You could
Oh,
propose an
okay.
amendment,
I'm
then we
good.
can vote, and then we can vote you down. I can show you how that's done if
just,
you want.
just desserts, just desserts.
Why wait now? 7 o'clock. Go ahead, Sean.
No, he was kidding.
No, I was joking.
Oh, okay. So that,
That's how late it is. Right.
yeah, I get that. So we have a motion. We do have a second properly. Any discussion on the original motion? I want to get distracted here. Hearing none. So roll call vote, please, Greg.
Member Noonan,
Yes.
member McCarl,
Yes.
member Bookin,
Yes,
member Cook,
Yes.
member Henry,
Yes.
member Remsen,
Yes.
and member Rosen.
Yes.
Okay. Wow.
That was a great ride. I appreciate all the effort people made, and thank you for sticking to the process. At this late hour at 7 o'clock, I would like to, at the discretion of the chair, forego review of the minutes, if that's acceptable to the board, unless you want to dig into them. Jane, I know there's a lot of comments and things out of place, but I'm sure we can deal with that later. Greg, any other unforeseen business within the last?
No unforeseen business. Just to let you know, we will have some new public hearing activity at the next meeting with some permit applications for subdivision, as well as the intended continued public hearing on the continued cluster development subdivision. We have not received any new information to date. I was anticipating that coming on the heels of the last meeting. So we'll see where we are, and you can also probably anticipate a return of the site plan review application. But so we will have a fairly full agenda next at the next meeting as well.
I apologize. I'm going to be in Florida.
Yep.
Event. I cannot attend the next meeting.
Enjoy yourself. I'm
Enjoy
sure.
it, Hank.
I'd like
Alright.
to congratulate everybody, particularly Beverly and Sean, and a little bit myself, for working so hard on this
Yeah.
last
Yeah.
ordinance. And like, yay, we need to go pop champagne or something, because however it turns out, it was a really, 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 really thorough process and a lot of work. And so I think we all deserve a hand.
I
Yay.
think there's no question, Jane, that you guys have done a fine job. And I think it's most unfortunate that people made some of the accusations that they did. They had many, many opportunities in 3 years, and for them to say we didn't try is just
That's
simply
okay.
a
We don't
distortion.
need to open that. I did my yoga breathing. It's all good.
Yeah. I just wanted to thank everybody just for the thoughtful conversation, and what a pleasure it is to work with people who are so dedicated. And the fact that we obviously have shown that we are not a unified force, that we are very discerning about our conversation and listen to each other. And I think that is the mark of a public board doing public service.
And I'd also like to thank Greg, because like, I know he gets paid to do this, but it sounds like it's an 80-hour-a-week job, and you've done a tremendous, tremendous job, Greg. We couldn't be here without you. So
Right,
thank
Greg.
you.
Thanks.
Indeed.
Well, I also give some credit to Gemma, although she's taking
Oh,
a
yeah,
nice
and
break.
Gemma
She'll
too.
be off for a couple of weeks.
And again, from my perspective, I think that the level of commitment and focus and thoughtfulness that we put into this effort, and even again, unanimous kind of a thing, which I'm fine with, but it only shows the thoroughness that this board really takes in something that is crazy, buried in a footnote, a use table that nobody ever sees unless you get into it. But the fact is that we had, in my 15 years of being on this board, probably the most thorough process on anything that we've done, and not being unanimous, meaning that we spent an enormous amount of time and energy. People have had their say. We've made a thoughtful recommendation to the city council on all these items, and I just thank you for the effort.
And the public has not been denied the opportunity in the whole 3 years to participate. They've been listened to, and the unfair accusations that were made are uncalled for.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
One more accolade, because I know I want to go, but Rick, unsung hero, chair of the board. I know, because I was chair of a planning board before I came to Gloucester, how much work there is in the background that nobody knows you're doing, and how much time it takes for you to do it. A lot of extra time, more than the rest of us. So thank you too for everything you do.
You're here.
Here, here.
Here, 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 here.
Here, here.
Thank you, David. All right, guys, go home, go to bed. Have a glass
Wait,
of
we have
wine.
to make a
Move
motion.
to adjourn, Mr. Chairman.
I second it.
Thank motions, Beverly seconds, roll call vote. Member Noonan,
Thank you.
Member McCarl,
Yes.
Member Bookin,
Yes.
Member Cook,
Yes.
Member Henry,
Yes.
Member Remsen,
Yes.
Member Rosen.
Yes.
Okay, see you in a couple of weeks.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Hank.